Leonie came out the now broken door to the village she had chosen to summon the creature called Jason in. Some of the buildings were burning, but the creature stood in the middle of the square, still holding that monstrous weapon in both hands, turning itself back and forth to face new Chiantics that came rushing it, using the weapon the second it turned. Killing them? No obliterating the raiders the second they came around a corner. Every raider, even those carrying shields, was removed from this world, to the sound of the weapon. And apparently, it had a name. The creature has started calling the weapon Millie the minigun. She watched as he suddenly turned to one wall and sprayed it, taking chunks out of the stone and wood with ease, before she saw 3 sets of raider bodies drop on the other side of it. And she cursed herself for bringing this monster here, as she watched it switch its weapon as a short shower of arrows came from a building. The creature ducked behind the tall monument just off the center of the square, and yelled out to the raiders, "Did you spare the people who lived in that house, you cowards?" It roared in question, only to get a second shower of arrows before it switched its weapon again, still some kind of staff, but the end of it was elite with a small flame. Then it reached into a pouch on the lower harness that she now recognized as a belt of some kind, retrieving a small cylinder. "If you don't want to die a worse fate than your friends send the QL inside out, you have 5 seconds to comply." Leonie wasn't sure what it was planning, but she used a basic detection spell and found no QL inside. She shouted out to the creature, "It's just raiders inside. Kill them. That's an order." She was stunned as the creature cocked an eyebrow at her, giving her pause before it spoke back. "Are you sure? I don't want to hurt your people," it called back, in clear defiance of the subjugation magic she had placed in the spell, but she nodded anyway. The creature looked a bit uncertain, but shifted and stood up slowly, before tossing the small object towards the building, summoning a cloud of lingering fog where it had landed, before he rushed into the summoned cloud, followed by gouts of flame and roars of fire shone through the smoke, like some salamander was in battle beyond it. As the fog cloud broke down the building, the last of the raiders were using as a refuge from the Millie weapon was an inferno of unprecedented scale. No part of it was not burning. It unsummoned its weapons, barring the one on his leg, placed its hands on its hip and took a deep inhale and sighed, "I love the smell of alchemist fire in the morning." It spoke with a note of humor and pity before turning back to her, its eyes narrowing, and he stormed over in a quick march. "Care to explain that order business, princess?" it said in an agitated growl, its right hand coming to rest on the weapon it kept on its leg. Leonie shrunk back and rushed over to the magic circle, looking the formula over again. The spell was done right. It should not be able to counter her magic, or even show aggression towards her. It should have followed her order when she told it to attack, but something was wrong. Her mind raced as she heard its boots make small thuds on the stone of this building. Taking a chance, she reached out what little mana she had, felt it sink into its form, and felt nothing in return. So the chance of it being magically more powerful than her was not the cause of this failure, which meant the only other reason was worse. She turned slow and stood up. The 3 potions she drank did their job and healed her completely. She faced the creature and noticed it towered about an inch over her, glowering at her, still agitated. The only reason the spell would still fail is because the world it came from has no mana at all, and its form can't use or be used by magic. This meant she had unwittingly summoned a monster that had access to an arsenal of weapons that couldn't be stopped or interfered with by magic. A monster that was stronger than the Chiantics, a monster that could in all likelihood destroy her world, and worse, she had pissed it off. She forced an apologetic smile and summoned her most calming voice. "I apologize. I forgot you are not my guard. I am used to ordering my guards by providing information. Thank you, Jason. You have saved this village, though I have a feeling the inhabitants will abandon it over trying to salvage the location," she said, her mind realizing that the only way to keep it cooperating with her is to appease it, and added warmly, "Know that your efforts here will be rewarded nevertheless." This Jason cocked its brow again, Its face, if it used the same body language as hers, showing skepticism over her words. Its gaze still locked on her, but sighed, after a second, and removed the helmet, revealing the shock of pale blonde hair and rounded ears, running its hand through and over it a few times after tucking the helmet under its arm before it's looked back up and spoke. "Okay, I don't really believe you, but you are the only point of information I have available to me, so answer some of my questions first. Then I'll make a final decision on whether or not I will help your nation. Normally, this would be handled by my superiors or my government, but I have a feeling that there are no other humans in your world." That word, human, that odd word, that her mind summoned information on, and she remembered a race that had been here at the birth of life but was destroyed by the Xialdar a few short years after the creation of life, in the eons past, back at the calamitous formation of life, when the world had thousands of races, so the tales told. Is that what he was? A thought for later, she thought, and smiled as she spoke. "Of course, you must be curious about a lot of things. My world will clearly be different than yours." "Great. First and foremost, the Chiantics are slavers. We have established that. But I must ask about your nation, too. Your nation doesn't deal in a slave trade, right?" It asked slowly, clearly trying to read her expression as she was with him. She figured it was showing concern or sorrow. "My nation does not deal in slaves. We do have bond familiars and summonable beasts, but no slaves," she said back calmly, then raised one of her upper eyebrows at it. "Would it have been an issue if we did?" The creature turned a bit away, clearly thinking over its response, before turning back with a bit of hesitation. "Yes and no. I wouldn't interfere with your slave trade unless I deem it cruel and barbaric. But if you treated your slaves fairly and gave them an equal chance to earn freedom, then I would not do anything. After all, when in Rome, do as the Romans do," they said with a serious tone and expression, she believed. "Next question. What is the highest form of alchemy advancement you made?" Liani stared a bit bewildered. "I am sorry, alchemy advancement." She was caught off guard by his question about a field few ever do research into, a field that only those who were mad or unstable worked in. No, not just alchemy, but also agriculture, military, sociological, and rudimentary earth magic studies. You know, alchemy, the stuff you need to make anything and everything. The studies of the world, it said back, not really clarifying its line of questioning. Leonie shook her head. "I am sorry, there is an issue with the linguistic boon. You are asking for things that my mind can't understand and is translating the word." She stopped and butchered her way through the word. "One steinsker as staju simple alchemy. My dearer stopperk furu, one dediger inskurter. Is a field that few do any work in." "Steri." Jason cocked his brow again. This time she was sure he was confused, then stroked his chin. Okay, let me ask you this. How many of your people can read, write, and do arithmetics?" he asked after a few seconds. Leonie was thrown back again. She struggled to recall such information, then gave a half-hearted reply. "About 6%, but most of that is limited to lower nobility and above." Jason stared at her for a few more seconds that she felt comfortable with, before he sighed and walked back a bit, sitting down on one of the pews and groaning before looking back up to her. "What is the best armor money can buy right now?" "Mail with plate costs about 7 gold coins, but only upper nobles can afford it," she said after a second, only to hear it groan and jump to its feet, spinning on point and kicking the pew, causing it to go sliding backward a good 5 or 6 feet, which, considering the solid stone it was made from, was more terrifying to her. But her ear picked up its words as it spoke to itself. "Fucking 13th to 14th century bullshit, which means fucking household knights and men-at-arms and stupid peasant levies," it cursed under its breath, then turned to her. "Nobles, what are the ranks and privileges?" She took a deep breath to settle her nerves, then looked to the pew it had kicked, noticing the fact it had cracked in half before looking back to the creature. There is my mother at the top as the queen. Then my eldest sister as the crown princess, the duchesses, who hold regions in my mother's name. Then countesses that hold territories, the baronesses that hold castles and small fiefs, then ladies that hold towns or small cities. She explained, and notice it nod along as it heard her, clearly taking in the information. Each one is responsible for paying taxes to the one above, with the exclusion of my sister. They are also responsible for maintaining an armed force of some kind in times of peace or gathering a levy when we are at war. It looked up at her as she finished, then spoke. Yeah, that's what I figured. Just wanted to make sure. I am a bit surprised that you run on a female rule, but I am not one to judge considering your nation's name is the queendom, it said, quickly. Why not? Women have great amounts of mana and can manipulate magic more easily. Liani remarked faster than she realized, but shuddered as it glanced back up to her, sending a rush of fear throughout her, as her mana hadn't recovered enough to outrun it yet. I am not complaining or criticizing. I am a unknown, so I am used to the idea and am fine with it as long as you respect the fact that I am a man, it said back calmly. Liani looked it over again. It was nothing like a man, or maybe it was. Her people's men were normally a bit smaller than her, and lacked mana too. And if it was a man, she felt that it was at least somewhat attractive. But something else pulled on her back to his last bit of information, as she worked around the unknown word it had spoken, getting it to look up again. What does that word mean? It seemed shocked a bit, then smiled. Oh, I guess that concept wouldn't be a thing here, without the mass dispersion of information and communication. Think of it as a scholar who reads a lot of books and studies arts for no other reason but entertainment. Because of it, I didn't think that you summoned me after my death as odd, just a bit surreal, or the fact you run off a female rule, or much of anything else. It is also why I asked about the power thing with my weapons and armor stuff, it said back in a cheerful tone. Liani tried to visualize the idea of reading and admiring art to a point that being summoned would not be odd to it, even considering it was from a manaless world, but let out a sigh as most books she read had history or facts in them, or they were religious texts. It cleared its throat to get her attention. Last question. The power you gave me, you said that I can create any and all weaponry or armor I wish with it, and I can destroy it too, apparently. What is my limit? Liani wasn't sure. How to answer this one? This boon was made by her, but its true inner works were simple and basic. Considering it could make a staff that killed the raiders with thunderclaps, the melee weapon that disintegrated others, and that last weapon that breathed out torrents of fire like a salamander, she wasn't sure anymore. It wasn't to do what it said, but she intended it to allow this creature to summon suits of armor, along with swords and shields, battle axes and spears, bows and arrows, not magical tools that unleashed devastation on its victims. She steeled her thoughts and chose to answer directly. I am not sure anymore. Your method of warfare is completely different from what I had hoped to catch. I was hoping for a knight in plate of golden light, yet I got you. Despite that, you have done as requested and dispatched my enemies with ease. Your weapons look like the battle staffs of my people, yet are far stronger. Add to that the last weapon you use, the one that breathes the flames of a salamander. I am no longer sure what your limit is, but I suppose we can run a quick test. The Jason creature looked with a cocked brow, but waited for her to keep going, a signal she realized a second later. Try creating the most basic of weapons you can think of, then the most advanced. The creature stretched its arms out to its sides, and after a second, 2 weapons arrived in its hands. On its left was a simple stone spear, Not that much more than some backward tribe on an island in the sea would use. In its right, however, was what she could only describe as an oversized great axe, with a box as big as the creature's head, acting as the joining point of the blade and shaft. The odd thing to her was that nearly the whole thing was made of some kind of gold, with intricate iconography and heraldry, with a handle like that of a lever in the shaft. The Jason looked to the simple spear and smiled, then turned its head and let go of the massive axe, its face plastered in shock and awe as the weapon fell with a hard and echoing clank. The creature stared at the weapon for a few seconds that dragged into a half-minute before it moved over and lifted the weapon, and she saw as it held it with a sense of reverie that would be seen in a temple during a holy sword bestowment. She saw as it leveled the weapon and placed its fingers on the lever, then stopped and looked to her. "Does this power make the weapons usable by me? You know, for safety reasons and whatnot?" She pondered the question, but found no answer, so she looked back. "I don't know. That weapon looks like a cross between your staff and a battle axe," she said, but she watched as it dismissed the weapon and summoned a new battle staff that looked like a green box from the most part, with a golden skull and wings on the side. The creature leveled it as it did with the staff it held when it arrived and did something. As a beam of what she could only describe as a disintegration ray came out the end and poke a hole of melting stone into the side of the building. The creature dismissed the weapon and then looked back to her, a grim expression on its face, before it spoke slowly and deliberately. "This power is too powerful. I can not only make a weapon that my kind do actually use in battles, but also weapons that we have a basic understanding of, which means I can use any weapon I can think of if I understand how it works. Those last two were from a collection of books and games that are set up to be in the far future of my world, and they are powerful, like compared to what my nation uses now. Those weapons would kick our teeth out." Leanie shuddered, then fell to the ground, landing hard as her mind pieced together something she had not expected. It could make weapons that itself deemed as too dangerous, weapons that it had to ask her if it could wield safely, weapons that were not even used by its people. She looked up at it, and a haunting and terrifying image fluttered to her foremost thought. If it ever found out that she had tried to enslave it, it may turn its weapons on her and her nation.